To tell us what he thinks of all of it, Marc Morano, executive editor and chief correspondent for CFACT, climatedepot.com. Marc, good to have you back with us.
Hey, thank you, Vince. Happy to be here.
Okay, all right. So you've got the field. What do you think of these guys as they were testifying today on this issue?
Well, do you want what I'm supposed to say, or do you want what I really think? That's
always what you really think. I genuinely do.
Well, this may surprise people because, A, they're great picks over who we have now. I mean, we're talking about Lee Zeldin to replace the current EPA Administrator Johnson. You have the Interior Secretary, Burgum, light years better. The Energy Secretary is better as well. The key here, though, is that they capitulated. All three. This is right yesterday for energy, and Zeldin today and Burgum today. They capitulated to that narrative on climate change. None of the three would stand up to it. And to me, that's what stood out. Now, just before I go any further down that dark path, let me just say that we have an energy secretary now, Jennifer Granholm, who did a video in 2018 calling for the end of oil, keep it in the ground. So we're going to be light years ahead of where we are. But here's why this is important. If you go, and I absolutely love Chris Wright for Energy Secretary. He's fantastic. But I'm a media guy. I was at the committee, the Senate Environment Public Works Committee, the communication director. I was the researcher, the speechwriter, and the entire communications. And to hear the narrative of all these Republican nominees, all three, give in on climate change in the year 2025, when you have Donald Trump, who just literally reset not just the climate change narrative and debate, but he reset the debate on DEI, the debate on transgender, the debate on critical race theory, the debate on Black lives. I mean, you can go through the list on ESG, and to have them just basically act like George W. Bush is president, very disappointing. In fact, just to go through it real quick, Chris Wright said, climate change is a global challenge that we need to solve. Burgum today just did not push back on anything, was very amiable. And when it comes to Lee Zeldin, the thing about Lee Zeldin is he's a New York Republican. He was featured on Years of Living Dangerously, 2017, I believe, and he joined the Republican Climate Solutions Caucus under pressure from Hollywood interviews on camera, and the media and liberals love this. So I'm not saying they're going to be bad picks in the overall. I'm saying that they are not naturally ready to take on the Washington establishment. And that's what upset me most about it today. But it also exposed the absurdity of the Democrats. But again, you want to see them push back, and they weren't by any of these three nominees.
You do. Narrative. Well, I will say, I agree with you. You do want to see them push back. But, like, for instance, Pete Hegseth had his hearing earlier this week. I wanted to see him fight back even more against the unfair attacks the Democrats were lobbing against him. But he maintained, he was very poised and very disciplined, and he had a good hearing, because the end goal of these hearings is for these guys to make it through and get confirmed. So do you think that maybe they leaned a little too much into that goal at the expense of arguing the greater principle?
Yes, I mean, they could have given advice to Supreme Court nominees. This is what they, of course, Supreme Court nominees famously do. I'm not saying that they should have argued with Bernie Sanders or Senator Whitehouse or Adam Schiff. I'm saying they could have gently pushed back with facts, figures. When it was the absurd scenario with Senator Markey in Massachusetts, one of the co-sponsors of the Green New Deal, pushing Zeldin about basically, look at L.A., that's what caused climate change. You don't think that's a problem? You don't think that's existential? The senators were asking him. And he just deferred, wouldn't comment. There's little things you can say, kind of like, wildfires used to be worse 100 years ago, Senator. To actually say, are you implying that somehow the Green New Deal would have avoided the California fires? Wildfires are typically land use, development, water usage, forestry practices, have nothing to do with the climate. In fact, peer-reviewed studies have shown just recently that precipitation and temperature have very little impact on these wildfires. And a U.S. Geological Survey just announced the L.A. wildfires are not climate change. Who am I to disagree with the top scientists at the United States Geological? That's the kind of thing I would have liked to have seen, gentle reframing and pushback instead. And here's the problem with this. If you go back all these decades, when you have someone like Donald Trump, who is a narrative changer, it's almost like Ronald Reagan, it just worries you, because if he doesn't have the team willing to fight back on this, what does it mean? It means they're not going to be as expansive in terms of reversing policies. They're not going to be revolutionary. They're going to sort of do what Trump wants and keep it safe. And we saw this with Trump's first term, and I hope this will be different. I mean, Trump's first term, every cabinet member, including Rick Perry, governor of Texas, including his Secretary of State, former Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson, and everyone except the EPA director told him to get out, to stay in the UN Paris Agreement. Only his EPA director told him to get out. And by the way, that was Scott Pruitt, his first term. He was the only cabinet member of Trump who was willing to challenge the narrative. What happened to Scott Pruitt in the first term? He challenged the climate narrative. He was harassed at restaurants. They went after him because apparently he got an Airbnb at somehow below market rates on some weekend rental or something. I mean, some rental he had. It was the most absurd standard, but it tells you this is what the establishment and the Uniparty cares about most. You must bend the knee at the narrative. And to me, that was a major failure of all three nominees. Having said that, I think they're going to do great policy. It's very disappointing.
I know exactly what you're saying. What you're talking about is sort of the outer perimeter of the debate. Like, what is the acceptable turf on which the rest of us all battle? Because these leaders really do set that. And in political science, we refer to that as the Overton window. Like, kind of what are the bounds of the debate? And I'll give you an example of where we've seen a lot of progress in the last few years. And that's on this transgender nonsense. People stopped saying, oh, it's a transgender man or a transgender woman. No, it's a dude playing women's sports. And once enough people keep repeating the truth out loud at volume, then it really sets the terms of the debate right there, squarely on, in that case, reality. This is the same thing you're talking about, which is like, don't play footsie with the climate change stuff and point out that the left doesn't even believe it. And when you hear Ron Wyden say today to Scott Besson that China is somehow in a clean energy race with the United States, that's on its face absurd. And Scott Besson, that's not somebody you're criticizing right now, I noticed. He was right to call that out. We're not in a clean energy race with them. We are in an energy race with them, he said.
Yeah, and in fact, I've heard that for years, always about, we got to win this race for China. And my answer was always, if China went to virtue signal the world and built, they have whole cities of old rusted windmills and solar they don't even use. They make a fortune from this revolution because they sell it to the West. It takes 500,000 pounds of material dug up from the earth to make one Tesla-sized battery. Guess who has the monopoly on all that mining and all that? China. It takes all the concrete, non-renewable plastic, steel to make these windmills. All of this so-called green energy is not green. It's arguable whether at the end, whether it's even a break-even proposition. It's not a break-even proposition. And this is what they fail. Now, in the case of someone like Doug Burgum, I'll go darker one last time. He's a former Microsoft executive, friend of Bill Gates. He has praised Bill Gates as essentially a visionary. He's all in on ESG, was all in on ESG. He's all in on carbon capture, which is the Republican version of solar wind mandates because they can hand it out to their campaign donors. And it's the idea of the most useless thing you can imagine, getting carbon dioxide pumping up. This is, by the way, Vince, this is important too. People don't understand. I went to the American Petroleum Institute event this week. You'd think, oh, big oil, they're against all this green energy subsidy. They want only a surgical removal of the Inflation Reduction Act. The farmers' lobby, which for decades has been skeptical of man-made global warming, guess what? They changed their position in 2024. Did they do that, Vince? Because they don't want to lose the subsidies now going to farms to capture carbon. It's another grip. They got farmers involved, and you have Republican congressmen. So this is what the nominees are up against, and they're playing the game. That's what was so disappointing. I don't want this to be, again, I'm going to go back to 1980s. I was a volunteer, Ronald Reagan, 1980. Ronald Reagan, the first 2 years were phenomenal, and then the Democrats took over, I believe, a big election in the midterms. His tax cuts were done. The budget cuts were done. And talking about domestic policy, he went on to do great foreign policy, but he was basically done after the first 2 years. For Donald Trump, he had probably 2 years or less to actually try to do all this. He needs aggressive people. He needs to control the narrative, and he needs to make it permanent. One of the ways you make something permanent is not capitulating to the establishment and the Uniparty and all the talking points. And again, that's what was frustrating. We were screaming today at these hearings.
Oh, I love it. I love your take on all of this. And the good thing is, what you should do is browbeat these guys into submission, make them better, You know, and like you said, these guys are going to be vast improvements over the current awful regime that's selling us out. I really do. I like this tact, and I'm always for it, which is like, hey, just get better. You know, and when you're weak, we'll let you know. Hey, I want to play one piece of audio for you from Joe Biden's feeble exit address last night. He talked about the existential threat of climate change. Here's what that sounded like. Marc Morano, take a listen.
So much is at stake. Right now, the existential threat of climate change has never been clearer. Just look across the country, from California to North Carolina. That's why I signed the most significant climate and clean energy law ever in the history of the world.
So wildfires that were exacerbated by the left's mismanagement of the land in California and the available resources to extinguish them, and the hurricanes, which, by the way, have become less frequent in the United States, are the result of climate change? Am I following that right?
You know, it's just complete bonkers. Even the United Nations, even our National Climate Assessment, which, by the way, was written by Greenpeace activist scientists, acknowledge that hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts are either no trend or declining trend on climate timescales of 30, 50, 100 years. There is no there when they talk about the existential threat. This is the equivalent of a boardwalk palm reader or soothsayer saying, many bad things will happen due to climate change. And guess what? Whenever anything bad happens, oh my gosh, that's due to climate change. I also liken this whole nonsense of every bad weather event. It's like a lottery. Your chance of winning the lottery, very low. The chance of someone somewhere winning the lottery, very high. So what they do is they find every lottery winner / every extreme weather event, and they make it look like it's a trend, And then what do you think? They want everyone to play the lottery. They want everyone to believe that. By the way, not true. CNN, shocking segment earlier this week. It's up at Climate Depot, my website. Their analyst went through and said in 35 years, there's been no change in people's fear or concern over global warming, and they don't blame the LA wildfires. So even despite all that propaganda, the President of the United States throwing out words like existential, the public isn't buying it according to CNN's data.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Boardwalk palm readers. That's funny. Yeah, Miss Cleo has been in charge of our climate policy. It's time for that to end. Hey, Marc Morano, thank you. Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I have to say, Hegseth handled everything I thought fantastic. He said anyone who promotes the sustainable Navy and the solar panels and the Army and all that, I mean, it's bonkers. Our defense secretary came out a couple years ago, Lloyd Austin, and said climate is an existential threat, making it more difficult, and we need to act as a military. We need a sustainable military. It's insane. I love Pete Hegseth there, as I love Treasury nominee, and I love the Department of Transportation, Sean Duffy. I love Chris Wright at Energy, but don't take me wrong. I'm just saying this is important. They're worried about their careers down the road. They don't want to be seen as a climate denier, but they could have handled it in a way much depther and much more creative, where they didn't give in to the narrative.
Yeah, anyway, you're like a football coach. You're like a football coach smacking them on the helmet and saying, get out there, play better next time. Hey, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, Marc Morano. Good to talk to you.
All right, thanks.